Well, thanks for coming today. This webinar is going to cover from a fairly high level how the power and flexibility of Backdrop CMS is affordable in the short term, but can also provide a great return on the initial investment over a longer term due to the project's commitment to stability and backwards compatibility, which is fairly unique among projects. My name is Laren Grotbaker, and I'm particularly interested in web development that helps groups that are doing important work in the world but don't always have endless budgets, especially in these uncertain times. I want to start off by just giving a few quick points of information, which will be fleshed out a little more as we go, just in case some of you aren't really familiar with Backdrop CMS, just to give you a sense of what it is. The project has been around for a while. It's been around for 10 years now. It forked from kind of late Drupal 7, early Drupal 8. And it has a lot of powerful features out of the box for structured content with dynamic views, granular permissions, dynamic layouts, content types, taxonomy, vocabularies, all that good Drupal-y stuff. And it's had a focus on making improvements and new features within a predictable, stable paradigm, meaning rather than just throwing the baby out with the bathwater and rebuilding it because it could be done slightly differently and be technically slightly better. There's a commitment to making sure that what has come before is not discarded willy-nilly. And part of the reason for that is seeking to keep websites affordable without compromising the power and flexibility. And I should also note, if as I'm going, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I think that I think I've left enough time that we could have some questions afterwards. So this is the theme that I'm going to keep referencing throughout. So Backdrop's commitment to improving the software while prioritizing stability and backwards compatibility ensures that you can get a long return on the investment you make in your site. This allows you to minimize running on the treadmill of constant updates, which consume your budget and risk breaking things, which results in a lower total cost of ownership. Okay, here we go. So as a starting point, it is important to note that improvements are constantly being made to the software. You may be familiar with the term long-term support, or LTS, which is basically like trying to keep things running but not making any functional improvements or things like that. It's just trying to absolutely keep the status quo. And Backdrop is not that, although I will make the argument later that it's kind of a safe alternative to an LTS, and you'll hear more about that in a minute. So improvements are happening. The thing I want to also start with is that because it's built on a base of Drupal 7 and early Drupal 8, it's got this long history, even before the last 10 years, of a tried and true base of software that it's built upon. What didn't start from scratch 10 years ago, it was built on something that has been around for a long time and has been tried and tested and true. So it's got some good bones from Drupal 7. That's all those structured content kind of things that I mentioned earlier, content types, taxonomy, vocabularies, views. And I'm happy to talk more about those at the end if anybody has questions about what that means. It also added some new major features. So there's a new layout system, which is completely new to Backdrop since it forked, which is very powerful. And configuration management is more in line with modern Drupal than Drupal 7 and can be very handy. If you want to use it, you can. There's not necessarily a requirement that you use it in any particular way. You can continue using your site as you used to in Drupal 7 if that was working for you, but it can provide a lot of new benefits if you do want to use it. As well, there's constant tweaking and improving of the UI, accessibility improvements going into Backdrop, and performance improvements as well. Backdrop has what we refer to as a 80% use case policy. So if there's modules that, from what we can tell, roughly 80% of sites that run Backdrop want to use, then there's no reason that it shouldn't be in core. And sometimes that gets embedded in core very deeply, just as part of the system. Sometimes it does get included as a module that can be turned on and off, depending on whether you're in the 20% that doesn't need it. And having these modules go into core is a benefit in the sense that they're there just out of the box, but also in the sense that now that it's part of core, you know it's not just going to be abandoned and you're running something that's unsupported, a contrib module that got abandoned and is unsupported now. So the last thing on this topic I want to say is that obviously Backdrop has to be committed to staying current with things like PHP versions, bundled libraries, and so on. You know, like the CK editor library is always updated to the latest version and that kind of thing to have the improvements that come with those libraries. So improvements are good, but can be a double-edged sword if improvements in one area end up breaking things that were working well previously. So what does it mean to prioritize stability and backwards compatibility when you're also committed to improving the software? And I'll give you a hint, rather than the chaos and instability that can come from a move fast and break things mindset, which, you know, hypothetically speaking, some of us may have seen recently. It's more like a move a little more slowly and make sure things continue to work mindset. So in terms of stability, if something changes when you're making improvements, you do all that is possible to make sure that there's an easy upgrade path where things just upgrade automatically, that there's no portion of the people that are using this that are suddenly left in the lurch. There's a way for them to get where they need to be easily without a major effort. There's some recent in the next version of Backdrop, we'll be supporting the upcoming or most current version of PHP 8.4. But in order to do that, we had to drop support for some of the very older versions of PHP that were still technically supported, even though not recommended. And so that's a case of where we're still supporting versions of PHP that most other systems have long abandoned. And this is, you know, part of the commitment to backwards compatibility. But as the underlying software that's, you know, outside of the Backdrop world requires it, we have to like bump that up periodically. And in cases like internally bundled library, there's a jQuery library that's included. And just in case your software, if you've written custom code or something like that, relies on an earlier version that was previously included in Backdrop core, even though when you install Backdrop out of the box now, it will have the more recent version of jQuery by default. There's a toggle option. So if you need to, for a little while, keep using the older version, you can do that. And then I also wanted to mention the predictable release schedule that can be very helpful in terms of stability and planning. It comes out 3 times a year on schedule. And if there's a security release needed, those happen on Wednesdays, so you can kind of plan your weeks around just leaving a little bit of time there just in case. But of course, the primary example of prioritizing backwards compatibility is the direct upgrade path that is available from Drupal 7. And so this next section here is really for you if you still have a Drupal 7 site. You know, even though Drupal is no longer officially supported, there are still something like 250,000 Drupal 7 sites out there. So this can still be very important, compelling for people that have these sites that has been working reasonably well. It's well architected. Then being able to have a direct path to Backdrop means you don't have to go through a complete rebuild or complete migration of all your content types, etc. And so it can be huge for both time and budget. Of course, you can still use this upgrade path and this upgrade process as a time to do some pruning, make some new additions, and so on if you've had that in your plans to make improvements as you go on the site. There's a Drupal compatibility layer in Backdrop to soften the transition. So if you do have custom code that's using Drupal namespaces, you can turn on keep this compatibility layer on, and some of those will just continue to function. until you have a chance to get that all cleaned up and moved over, the namespace is all moved over. If you don't need that compatibility layer, you just turn it off. If you've trained your staff, if you've gone through, making different kinds of trainings and getting people all up to speed, those trainings and workflows can still be relevant, reducing your training time and capitalizing on some of that effort that you've already made there. I generally tell people that the interface between Drupal 7 and Backdrop is not identical, but it's familiar but improved. These various tweaks to the UI and the interface and making things sort of just work like you would have expected them to work in the first place are all there, and just make it generally smoother to use compared to Drupal 7. And I often find that when you have these Drupal 7 sites that have been running for years and years and years, most people have a list of things that are either workarounds they have to do to make it do what they want it to, or things that don't work exactly like they wish it did, or minor annoyances. And having this list with you as you do this upgrade path, you may find that some of these things just get fixed automatically as part of the core upgrade and the contrib upgrades that happen. And you may be able to have a lot of these other annoyances and things cleaned up in the same process. So it can be very useful in that regard. When you take a piece of software that is actively being improved and staying current rather than just stagnating, and a community that's also cognizant that many organizations appreciate some longer term stability and predictability, you end up with the possibility of a site that you can use and shape and improve as you wish over a longer period of time, even if your budget isn't enormous. So this idea of a longer return on what you're investing into the site. So stability doesn't mean that you just have to build the site and then put it on autopilot, because Backdrop is very flexible and can be used with an evolving strategy to grow your site over time, with improvements, additions, changes, adaptations to the site content, structure, and theme as needed and as your budget allows. You may not have, an entire budget to do everything you want to do in one budget cycle, but you can get onto Backdrop in one budget cycle, and then the next budget cycle you can, figure out what the next sort of sprint is going to be and how you're going to improve things next, and sort of keep on building and evolving the site on that solid base, that's solid, stable base. And I'll reiterate again, anyone with a Drupal 7 site that's still performing relatively well, that then upgrades to Backdrop, will continue to get a good return on that initial investment that was made all those years ago. It'll be sort of a continuation of many, many years of a really good run for a website. So as we approach the Drupal 7 end of life that came and went recently, I'd often see references to the usage chart showing how many hundreds of thousands of sites are still on Drupal 7. And with that recurring question, why are they still on Drupal 7? Why haven't they moved to something else? And I'd venture to guess that a good number of them have sites that are exactly this model, this sort of long-term investment model that maybe the budget doesn't support, or the organization doesn't have the people power to be constantly rebuilding from scratch and rethinking from scratch, and wants to build a site that's solid and stable, and then evolve it and sort of grow it over time. So someone who also works with Backdrop sent me a quote from a site owner who used this metaphor of being on a treadmill of updates before coming to Backdrop. And that treadmill has accelerated with much of modern web development. So you may not have a large development team or any development team, and you want to minimize the team time that's spent on doing these updates, or your site budget may not be huge, as the example I just gave. So your priority may be using that budget towards website content and features, and not doing these constant updates. And I kind of hinted at the beginning about this idea that I have, that in my opinion, I feel like Backdrop is a safe alternative to an LTS, a long-term support, where you get that safety and security of this commitment to backwards compatibility, but you're still getting improvements to the software and accessibility features and all that kind of stuff. So to me, I think it's kind of like the best of both worlds in that way. So as I mentioned, much of modern web development involves this enormous dependency tree of third-party libraries, and that requires constant monitoring and updating. And sometimes that actually ends up driving decision-making for the larger project as a whole. We saw this with when modern Drupal adopted Symfony, and then the version of Symfony that was in Drupal 8 was reaching end of life. So even though maybe they wouldn't have said Drupal 8 is going to end at this point, they said, well, that Symfony's ending. Symfony 3 is ending, so therefore Drupal 8 has to end as well and go to Drupal 9, which will be Symfony 4. And then likewise, when Symfony 4 is ending, okay, Drupal 9 is got to end as well. And so you have this sort of fast treadmill pace that is just driving things into this cycle of updates, which is not for everybody. So Backdrop has chosen to include only select essential libraries and minimize this treadmill and provide the before mentioned stability and predictability in that way. So I also will call out the fact that, the type of site that I'm referring to that this is helpful for are these sort of more longer term sites. And it may not be ideal for projects that have bigger development teams, that have larger budgets, they have a faster pace of ongoing development. So I have a metaphor here, which is the internal combustion engine versus an electric motor. And the metaphor is, why are costs lower to run the electric vehicle than the gas vehicle? And obviously up front, yes, you're not paying for gas, but it's more than that when you think about ongoing maintenance costs, because there's no oil changes with the electric vehicle because there's no oil. There's no tune-ups because there's no timing belt. There's no spark plug replacement because there's no spark plugs. And this is the type of benefit that you get when you have a system with fewer moving parts in terms of ongoing maintenance costs. So it's typical to start a web project focusing on the immediate project at hand, which is either building or upgrading or retheming a website. But it can also be useful to do some of this long-term thinking and give the longer vision a thought as well. Because not only is the immediate project affordable with Backdrop, but the longer term costs are smaller in this ongoing way that I've mentioned. So you have this lower total cost of ownership. Some of the main takeaways I'll leave regarding Backdrop before I show a few example sites that we've worked on. It's affordable to build with, and especially to upgrade to from Drupal 7. It's inexpensive to maintain over time. It's flexible to grow and adapt with your needs, and it provides this predictable long life cycle for your website. So now I'm going to go quickly through a few example Backdrop sites that we've helped with and give some short descriptions of how Backdrop met the needs of the moment for these organizations, the needs of the moment and beyond, I guess. So the first one here I've got is Stanford Solo on and off campus learning opportunities. This is a complex web application. It ties into Stanford systems, but other than that, it's largely self-sustaining. At the time when this project was done, when it was upgraded from a Drupal 7 site to Backdrop, the estimated savings of upgrading to Backdrop instead of rebuilding their site in modern Drupal was close to $500,000. And that big number is largely because of the amount of custom code that this site or application has underneath that were written for Drupal 7 and largely worked with minor tweaking in Backdrop rather than having to rewrite them all from scratch. So, I mean, the lower upgrade costs and the lower costs to run the site means more of the budget can be put into features, improvements, bug fixes, user interface, and so on. And then Configuration management, which I mentioned earlier, is super handy, makes it largely painless to test different branches in separate environments and merge it down. So you do still have some of these more advanced workflow options if you want them. And Bud Werner Memorial Library. This is our most recent Backdrop launch, so we'll dwell on it a little bit. This is a Drupal 7 site on the left, and the team had built this wonderful site with all this great functionality that was working really well. Needed to get off of Drupal 7. Also decided it was time for a visual refresh, and so you can see, we basically took the site as it existed and almost reskinned it with a few changes here and there in the structure and so on, but largely using the skeleton that was there, put a new skin on top of it, and rework the site on top of all the good work that they had already done and all of the staff training they had already put into the site. I've got a few slides on this one. We've got the mobile view and directories and calendars and book lists and things like that. So this one was really fun to work on, to get that nice new visual piece of it, as well as some of the improvements underneath. Penn State undergraduate education had a series of, well, a lot of Drupal 7 sites, but there's a few others thrown in the mix as well. I think there was one that was still a simple straight HTML site that ended up coming over as well as part of this whole larger process. But so this is a Backdrop solution. It provides different units and departments with a consistent website shell to work within, and all of the default configuration, that's the content types and paragraph types and all that stuff, can be sort of pre-configured or pre-installed out of the box using a shared configuration collection that then gets imported. And so you have an underlying consistency. We also worked in the theme some different settings that allow some unique individuality among the sites depending on how they configure the theme settings and color schemes and so on. But underneath, the whole thing is running on a consistent base, which makes maintenance going forward much more manageable. You don't have 12 different themes or 12 different sites. You've got largely similar underpinnings for 12 sites with some differences on top. So has worked really well. And so this gives them the Drupal 7 upgrades have happened. We have some other sites have come in as well. There's always room in the future if they want to migrate from other platforms and spin up, convert those other platforms to the same consistent system. So it's pretty cool to see it being used in a place where it's kind of a larger scale than just a single site. And then I've got the last example I have here to show right now is Island Press. Affordability is key for a small nonprofit organization that's doing important work like Island Press is. And so Backdrop has allowed us to upgrade their Drupal 7 site. It was beginning to deteriorate, fix many of the issues in the process, and now set the stage for additional future visual and functional improvements over time. That sort of process I mentioned, where you do it bit by bit, you figure out what your next improvement's going to be, and you make it, and then your next one, and then your next one, and you're just continually building on this solid base that you don't have to worry is going to be pulled out from under you. So